Turn the carriage around, miss. The Duke of Larkmoor's house has eaten kinder governesses than you. His children will have you out before Christmas. I'm telling you this for nothing because you have a kind face. Hannah Linwood lowered her teacup in the parlour of the Black Hart Inn and looked across the rough deal table at the stranger who had spoken. He had folded himself into the seat opposite hers without being invited, and now sat with his gloved hands flat upon the wood, as though to prove that he carried no weapon other than warning. He was perhaps 40, well-shaven, well-dressed for a public room on the road to Larkmoor. A signet ring on his small finger caught the firelight. Gold, cut with the device of a falcon stooping at a hair. She did not know him. He did not introduce himself. He had simply chosen the moment her travelling cloak was drying on the back of her chair and the innkeeper had stepped into the kitchen, and he had used that moment to tell her that the Duke of Larkmoor's house ate governesses. "I have signed the post already," she said mildly, "and the children are expecting me by nightfall." The children. His mouth tightened around the word. The children expect a great many things, miss. They expected a mother last spring. They expected a steward who was not stealing from them. They expected the tutor in August who has not been seen since. Whatever they expect of you, His Grace will undo before the second Sunday. Hannah drew her shawl closer with the hand that did not hold the cup. Outside, a slow autumn rain had begun against the inn's small windows. She was aware, as she always was when a stranger took an unusual interest in her affairs, of the little carved horse in the inner pocket of her cloak, a child's toy she had carried for 6 years, polished smooth at the withers from her own thumb. She did not know yet why she thought of it just then. She would understand by Wednesday. "Sir," she said, "you have not given me your name." "A friend." He did not smile. "A friend who has watched that gate close on 3 young women in a year. The first wept. The second screamed. The third refused to speak of the place at all when she came back to her father's house. And her father, miss, was a magistrate. I urge you most earnestly to find another post." She set the teacup down. The clink of it was very small in the small room. "Then I shall be the 4th, she said pleasantly, "and we shall see whether I weep or scream or hold my tongue." She rose. She was 23, slim and bright-eyed, with the kind of face that strangers warmed to before they understood why. The innkeeper's wife had pressed an extra slice of seed cake on her without being asked, and the postboy had insisted on carrying her own portmanteau out to the yard before she could refuse him. Her hair was a deep chestnut, plainly dressed under a serviceable bonnet, and her travelling gown was a striking russet wool, the only good thing she owned, made for her by her late mother in a brief season of competence between illnesses, and worn by Hannah only when she meant to be looked at squarely. She meant to be looked at squarely now. The stranger rose with her. He set a card on the table without flourish. The card was blank. "If you change your mind, miss, the Black Hart will know how to send for me." He bowed and left her. She watched the door close behind him, and only then did she allow herself a small, controlled exhalation. Her left hand, she noticed, had crept inside her cloak and closed around the carved horse without her consent. She loosened her fingers one at a time. The innkeeper came back in, carrying a fresh pot of tea, saw the empty seat, and frowned. "Was the gentleman troubling you, miss?" "Not at all," said Hannah. "He merely wished to recommend an alternative employer. Tell me, does His Grace of Larkmoor often inspire the local strangers to interview governesses on his behalf?" The innkeeper set the pot down. He had a broad, weather-worn face, and the careful courtesy of a man who depended upon discretion for his trade. "His Grace, miss, inspires the local strangers to a great many opinions, of which approximately none have been formed at his table. He does not come to the village. He has not come to the village since Christmas was a year. There are those who say that proves him proud, and those who say it proves him grieving. And those, miss," his eyes moved to the closed door, "who say things they have been paid to say." I would not, were I you, take the third sort home in my pocket. Hannah picked up the blank card and turned it over. Then she turned it over again, as though the second look might reveal what the first had concealed. There was nothing. No name, no street. Only the pale impression where a printer's plate had once pressed a crest and then been planed smooth. "Mr. Hodges," she said, "would you be so kind as to send my trunk to His Grace's gate by the next cart? I shall walk the last mile. I find that I should like to see the place at my own pace, before I see it at theirs." She paid for her tea. She tucked the blank card into the same pocket that held the carved horse. For company, she told herself, although she did not believe herself. And she stepped out into the slow autumn rain to begin a position from which 3 young women had returned weeping, screaming, or silent. It was not yet 4 o'clock. The lane to Larkmore House ran east from the village between hedgerows hung with hips and haws, and the rain was the polite, persistent kind that did not drench, but glazed every leaf and made the gravel ring under her boots. She had walked perhaps half a mile when she heard the children before she saw them. They were not laughing. That was the first thing she noticed. 2 clear, careful voices, not raised, discussing. They were on the other side of the hedge, in what she would learn later was the home wood, and as she came round the bend she saw them through a gap. A girl of perhaps 8, in a plain dark grey pinafore, holding tightly by the hand a smaller girl of perhaps 5, in the same plain grey, and both of them watching the lane with the still attention of creatures that have learned to look before they move. The elder one saw Hannah first. She did not start. She drew her sister an inch closer to her side, and she waited. "Good afternoon," said Hannah, slowing. The russet of her gown was the only colour for half a mile. "I am Miss Linwood. I am to be your governess, if you will have me." The smaller child made no sound at all. She did not nod, did not shake her head, did not blink unusually. She only watched. The elder child considered Hannah with the directness that was not rude, but was not, Hannah saw, going to be friendly until friendliness had been earned. She had her father's grey eyes, although Hannah did not know yet that they were her father's. Her hair was pale and severely braided. She held her sister's hand very precisely, the way someone holds the rope of a bell. "You are early," the elder said. "Papa said tea time." "I walked from the village," said Hannah. "I wanted to see the house before the house saw me." The elder one's mouth did not smile, but something behind her face shifted by perhaps a degree. The smaller child, without warning, slipped her free hand out from her sister's grip and walked 5 careful, determined paces across the wet grass and the gap in the hedge, and stopped directly in front of Hannah, and reached up and tucked her small, cold fingers into Hannah's gloved hand. She did not speak. She did not look up. She only held on. For a moment Hannah did not breathe. The carved horse in her pocket pressed against her ribs through the layers of cloak and gown, like a small, warm coal. "Thea," said the elder sharply. "Thea, come here." Thea did not come there. Thea held on. Hannah crouched, slowly, until her face was level with the smaller child's. Up close she saw that Thea had a smattering of freckles across the bridge of her nose, lashes so fair they were almost invisible, and the most serious, grey eyes Hannah had ever encountered in a child. Hannah did not say anything aloud. She only closed her own gloved hand a little around the small, cold fingers, and she did not let go first. "My name is Hannah," she said, quietly, to the child alone. "And I have walked a long way to meet you. We do not have to talk yet, you and I. We can talk later, or never, if it suits." Thea did not nod, but she leaned, by perhaps half an inch, against Hannah's shoulder. The elder child watched this happen with an expression Hannah could not read. Then she walked, in her own time, across the wet grass to stand at her sister's other side. "Beatrice," she said, in answer to the question Hannah had not asked. "B," She is Thea. She does not speak. She has not spoken since the spring. I tell you this so that you will not waste your time telling her she must. Thank you, said Hannah gravely. I shall not. And so that you will not lie to my father about her progress, in the hope of being kept on. Hannah looked up at the small, severe face and decided on the instant that if she stayed in this house a year, she would not, on any account, lie to Beatrice about anything. I shall not lie to your father about her progress, she said. I shall not lie to him about anything that I can help. If I find I must lie, I shall first warn you both, and then lie quietly, in writing. Beatrice considered this. Acceptable, she said. Stand up, please. The rain is making your hat ridiculous. Hannah stood. The three of them walked together up the lane, Thea's hand in Hannah's, Beatrice on the other side of her sister at a measured distance, and not one of them speaking. And that silence, of all the silences Hannah had been warned about that day, was the one she would remember as the moment her decision was made. Larkmoor House, when they came round the last bend, was not what she had expected. She had expected a brooding pile, all blackened stone and withered ivy, dressed in the morbid imagination of strangers. What she saw was an honest, grey stone house of the last century, 4 square, 2 stories high, with white painted window frames and a door of polished oak under a stone porch carved with falcons. A single light burned in an upstairs room. Smoke rose from 3 chimneys. The lawn was cut, the gravel was raked. It was the house of a man who had not abandoned anything, merely a man who had stopped opening the door. The door opened now. He filled the doorway. That was the first thing. Not his face, not his voice, only the fact that he occupied the whole frame of it without effort, as though doors of this kind had been built around men of his shape. He wore no coat over his shirt. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and his forearms were the corded, working forearms of a man who did not think of himself as being above his own land. His shoulders strained the linen at the seams. He was perhaps 27, no older. His hair was dark and slightly disordered, as though he had run a hand through it not long since. His eyes were the grey of his elder daughters. He saw the 3 of them on his gravel, his children with their hands in a stranger's, and he stopped. Beatrice, he said. His voice was very quiet. It carried. Papa, said Beatrice. She is the new one. She walked from the village. I have informed her about Thea. His eyes moved from his elder child to his younger, to the woman crouched, no, standing now, between them. The grey eyes found Hannah's and held them. Miss Linwood, I presume. Your Grace. You are early. By half an hour. I beg your pardon. I shall stand outside the gate the next time. She had not meant to be funny. She had meant only to be honest in the small, flippant way she found herself speaking when she was nervous. Which she was. Very. Although she would not have given him the courtesy of knowing it. To her astonishment, the corner of the Duke's mouth, only the corner, only briefly, moved. That will not be necessary, he said. Come in. He stood aside. Thea did not let go of Hannah's hand as they passed under the carved falcons of the porch. Beatrice stayed exactly half a pace behind her father, the way a small dignitary follows a head of state. The door closed behind them with the soft, well-oiled click of a hinge that had been recently attended to. Inside, the hall was warm, beeswax and wood smoke, an arrangement of late roses on a polished side table, a long turkey runner the colour of mulled wine. Hannah noted these things, with the trained eye of a woman who had, in her time, carried tea trays through rooms a great deal less cared for. There was no dust. There was no neglect. There was, only, a kind of held breath about the place, as though the house had been waiting, very patiently, for something it had not yet been allowed to become. Mrs. Pemberton will show you to your room, said the Duke. Beatrice, take your sister upstairs and change her stockings. They are wet. Miss Linwood, I shall expect you in the library at 6. We shall speak before supper. Yes, Your Grace. He inclined his head. He did not say anything further. He walked away across the runner, with the long, contained step of a man who carried his height like a courtesy to ceilings, and the moment he was through the door at the end of the hall, Beatrice turned to Hannah, with the air of a captain handing over the watch. "He is not as bad as the stranger told you," she said. Hannah's breath caught. "Beatrice, who told you about a stranger?" Beatrice looked at her with her grey, too old eyes. She did not answer. She took her sister's hand from Hannah's, with a small, apologetic pressure as though to say, "I'm borrowing her back from you for an hour." And she led Thea up the staircase without a backward glance. Hannah stood alone in the warm hall, with her wet hat ridiculous on her head, the carved horse in her pocket, and the blank card from a man without a name. She had been in the house 7 minutes. The library at 6 was lit by 2 oil lamps and a fire of beechwood that had been laid by someone who knew his business. The Duke of Larkmore was standing at one of the lamps with a folded letter in his hand when Mrs. Pemberton, a small, brisk, kind-eyed woman of perhaps 50, whose welcome to Hannah upstairs had been brief and useful and entirely without theatre, opened the door and said, "Miss Linwood, Your Grace," and closed the door behind her, leaving them. He did not turn at once. He set the letter down upon the desk, square-edged, and only then did he turn. "Sit, please," he said. She sat. He did not. He stood with the desk between them, his hands flat upon its edge, and he looked at her for what felt like a long minute, and was probably 6 seconds. "You met a stranger at the Black Hart this afternoon?" It was not a question. Hannah folded her hands in her lap. "I did, Your Grace." "He warned you against this house?" "He did." "In what terms?" "That it had eaten kinder governesses than I." The Duke's eyes were very steady. She could not yet read them. She could read only that they did not waver, did not slide, did not perform any of the small courtesies of evasion she was accustomed to from men in positions of power. "And you came on regardless?" "I had signed the post." "Many people sign posts they then unsign." "I do not." Something at the back of his eyes changed by perhaps a degree. He sat down at last, in the chair behind the desk, and gestured for her to keep hers. "Miss Linwood, I shall not insult you by pretending I have no idea who that man was. I do not know his name today, but he wears the livery of a particular interest, and that interest has been busy in this neighborhood since the spring. 3 governesses have left this house in 12 months. The first because her father, on receipt of a forged letter purporting to be from me, withdrew her. The second because she was offered, by a man she met by accident at the village shop, twice her annual wage to refuse the post and walk away from it before she had unpacked. The third because she was, at length, frightened from her bed at night by a sequence of small, staged accidents on the road outside, and chose, sensibly, not to wait for a less small one. Hannah did not speak. She was listening, the way she had learned, in another house, in another life, to listen to the words a man chose when he had decided to be honest, only as long as the honesty served him. She did not yet know whether the Duke of Larkmore had so decided. "You are wondering," he said, "why I do not move against the interest." "I am, Your Grace." "Because the interest has, in his keeping, certain letters of mine. They are real. They are also, in the absence of context, the worst letters I have ever written. They were written to my late wife in the autumn before we lost her, when we were ill-matched and unhappy. And they would, if read in court, persuade a magistrate that I was a man my wife had reason to fear. I was not such a man. I did not love her. I should not have married her. But I did not give her cause for fear. The letters do not say that I did. They say only that I was cold. They say it at length and well." He did not look away from her as he said it. She found she respected him for that, and the interest threatens to publish them. "The interest threatens to use them, Miss Linwood, in an application for the wardship of my children. He claims a moral case. The letters provide him with the moral case. If he wins the application, he becomes the children's legal guardian until Beatrice is of age, and the income of their mother's marriage settlement, which is not small, passes through his hands for the next 13 years. He would not harm the children. He would only spend their inheritance and return them to me at 21 with empty pockets and educations he had chosen. Your Grace, why are you telling me this? He picked up the folded letter on the desk. He did not unfold it. He held it as though it weighed something more than paper, because the third governess, before she left, told my eldest daughter that I was a wicked man, and Beatrice has been waiting ever since to be told it again by someone she trusts. If you intend to leave, I should rather you left this evening than after my daughter has begun to like you. I shall pay your wages for the year regardless. I shall send you back to London in my own carriage. I shall write any reference you require. Decide now, please. It was, Hannah thought, the strangest job interview she had ever been given. It was also the most honest. She felt the carved horse in her pocket like a second heartbeat. Your Grace, she said, I have been in this house 7 minutes longer than I was in the inn. In that time, your younger daughter has held my hand without speaking, and your elder daughter has appointed herself my conscience. I have not yet unpacked. I do not know whether you are a wicked man. I shall reserve my judgment on you until I have caught you being one. In the meantime, I will not be paid off, and I will not be sent back, and I will not pretend to be frightened of letters I have not read by men I have not been introduced to. I shall start tomorrow at 8:30, if that suits. He looked at her for a long second. It will suit, he said. He stood, and so did she. She had reached the door before he spoke again. Miss Linwood. She turned. The stranger. Did you take any token from him? A card, a name, a direction? She put her hand into her pocket and brought out the blank card. She walked back across the carpet and laid it on his desk. He did not pick it up at once. He looked down at it. He looked at it the way a man looks at a footprint in his own garden. Thank you, he said. She left him with the blank card under his hand. In her own room, with the door closed, she took out the carved horse and set it on the little dressing table beside the candle. The horse was perhaps 2 inches long, of pale beech wood, the mane suggested rather than carved, the legs sturdy and intentionally too short. Her father had made it in the summer she was 17, the last summer in which her father had made anything at all, for her younger sister, who had not lived to use it. After her mother had also gone, 6 years ago in Bath, the little horse was the only object Hannah had brought out of that lodging house. She did not believe in talismans. She carried it because the thought of not carrying it made her light-headed. She had walked into a house with 2 motherless children and 1 widower, and within an hour she had agreed to stay. She did not yet know that the man who had set the blank card upon the deal table at the Black Hart wore the same signet ring her failing mother had pressed into her hand 6 years before, with a grey, trembling whisper of, "Do not let him in this room again." She would know by Wednesday. She would know on Wednesday because on Wednesday, the man would come to the door of Larkmoor House and ask, very politely, after the children's health. But that was Wednesday. Tonight, she set the carved horse beside the candle, and she looked at it for a long time before she blew the flame out. Breakfast at Larkmoor was at 8:30 in a small panelled room beyond the morning room, with a bay window onto the kitchen garden. The Duke was already at the table when Hannah came down. So was Beatrice. So, on a low cushion at her sister's elbow, was Thea. None of them were talking. Beatrice was buttering toast for Thea with the focus of a watchmaker. Thea was eating it. The Duke was reading a gazette and ignoring his own coffee. "Good morning," said Hannah. "Good morning," said Beatrice gravely. The Duke looked up over the gazette. His hair was damp. He had been outside. "Miss Linwood, will you take coffee or tea?" "Coffee, please." "Sit then." She sat. She had dressed in a plain bottle green wool, her one other tolerable gown, and she had pinned up her chestnut hair severely, and she had decided, at 4 in the morning, that she was going to treat this house with the courtesy of a place she meant to stay in, which meant beginning as she meant to go on. Beginning meant breakfast. Beginning meant, also, addressing Beatrice's wholly silent younger sister, as though her silence required no explanation. "Thea," she said conversationally, "I am told that the Homewood has hazelnuts at this season, and I am very fond of hazelnuts. After lessons today you might show me where the tree is, if it is on speaking terms with us." Thea's grey eyes lifted from the toast. She did not nod. She blinked, slowly. Then she returned to the toast. "That," said Beatrice severely, "was a yes." "I shall take it as such," said Hannah. The Duke did not look up from the Gazette. The corner of his mouth, however, did the same not-quite thing it had done the previous afternoon on the gravel. Hannah took her coffee black and decided that she had won her first encounter of the day, although she could not have said with whom. Lessons that morning were in the schoolroom on the second floor, a room of yellow wallpaper and a slightly tilted globe and a wonderful sash window facing south over the orchard, which had been picked of all but a few late apples. Hannah had brought down from her trunk the books she had thought she would need: a primer of French verbs, a shockingly good little grammar of Greek that she had taught herself out of in Bath, a battered Plutarch in English, and a brand-new copy of a popular ladies' novel for occasions on which propriety demanded she pretend to teach lighter things. She set them in a row on the schoolroom table. "Beatrice," she said, "tell me, please, where you are." "I have read the lives," said Beatrice, with the air of a duellist offering a card. "Coriolanus and Cato I did not understand. The rest were tolerable." "Greek?" "My father has been teaching me." "How far?" "The third declension. I dislike it." "Everyone dislikes it. We shall continue. Thea, is it in order if you sit on the rug today and we read picture books, or would you prefer to stay at the window?" Thea considered the rug. Thea considered the window. Thea walked, with a serious, small dignity, to the window. She sat upon the broad sill and turned her face toward the orchard. "Window it is," said Hannah. So began the first morning, and the second, and the third. By the end of the first week, she had established that Beatrice could read Greek faster than Hannah could when pressed, that Thea would put a hand on Hannah's wrist when she wished a page turned, that the Duke came up to the schoolroom every afternoon at 4 for precisely 15 minutes, took his elder daughter's report on her work, and said 3 things to Hannah, all polite, none personal. By the end of the first week, Hannah had also begun to look forward to those 15 minutes with an attention that, if she were a more cautious woman, she would have begun to rebuke. She was not a more cautious woman. She had been cautious once. It had not, in her experience, kept anyone alive who was going to die. It was on Wednesday afternoon, 6 days after she had taken the post, and 1 day before she would have said she had begun to feel safe in it, that the maid Annie put her head round the schoolroom door at 3:15 and said, in the carefully blank voice of a servant carrying news she did not approve of, "Miss, His Grace is in the drawing-room with a gentleman. He asks if Lady Beatrice and Lady Theodora may be brought down for 10 minutes only. He says the gentleman is family." Beatrice's small face emptied of its comer. Thea, on the windowsill, did not turn. "Annie," said Hannah very evenly, "is the gentleman tall, or thin, or wearing a signet ring with a falcon on it?" Annie blinked. "All 3, miss." "Tell His Grace we shall be down in 5 minutes." Annie withdrew. Hannah closed the Plutarch quietly and laid her hand for a moment flat upon its cover, as though to keep something inside it. Then she stood. "Bee," she said, "listen to me. We shall go down because your father has asked it. You shall do exactly as you have always done in that gentleman's presence. No more, no less. You shall not look at me for instruction. You shall not let Thea out of your hand. If I touch your shoulder, You shall make whatever excuse you like and bring her back upstairs at once. Do you understand?" Beatrice nodded once. She had not asked who the gentleman was. She did not need to ask. Hannah lifted Thea down from the sill. Thea's small fingers found her wrist in the place that had become their place. They went down the stairs together, the three of them, in silence, and as they crossed the hall toward the drawing-room door, Hannah looked once down at her own steady hand and thought, 6 years, and was surprised to find herself perfectly calm. He was standing at the window when they came in. He had his back to them, looking out at the lawn, both his hands clasped lightly behind him with the gloves still on. The light from the long windows fell across his coat, fell across the gold of the signet ring on the small finger of his left hand. The Duke was at the fire, very still. The man at the window turned. "My dear Beatrice," he said. "My dear Theodora, how you have grown." He did not look at Hannah. He did not look at her because he had not, at the inn, seen her face by anything but firelight. In good drawing-room light he might have known her. In the half-instant before his glance moved past her, she took the precaution of bending, attentively, to adjust Thea's sash. By the time she straightened, his attention was upon the children. "Lord Hartwell," said the Duke, in a voice so level it was almost flat. "You will say what you have come to say." Hannah felt her stomach go very still. Hartwell. She had not been certain. She had been 95% certain since she had stood up from her teacup at the Black Hart. The other 5 had been hope. Lord Hartwell smiled at the children with a gentleness that was, Hannah saw, perfectly real, and made the rest of him more frightening, not less. "Edmund," he said, without turning his head from the children, "I have come to ask, as is my right and indeed my duty, after the welfare of my late sister's daughters. I observe that they are in the keeping of yet another stranger. May one ask?" And now his eyes did move, unhurriedly, to Hannah. "The lady's name?" Hannah stood with Thea's hand in hers. Beatrice was, very correctly, half a step in front of her sister. "Miss Linwood," said the Duke. Linwood. Lord Hartwell's smile did not change. His eyes, she saw now in good light, were a paler grey than the Duke's, almost colourless. "Linwood. From London, my lord, by way of Bath, where I was raised." Bath. His smile remained. The pale eyes did not blink. "Ah." There was a small, dreadful pause. He had recognized the name. She had counted on his recognizing it. She had also counted on his being too well-mannered, in front of the children, to acknowledge it. "Bath is a small town," he said, "for the bathing season. Did you take the waters?" "My mother did, my lord. They did not answer." "How sad," said Lord Hartwell with grace. "I am sorry to hear it." He turned smoothly back to the Duke. "Edmund, since the children are well, and since I see that they are well attended, I shall not impose upon you longer this afternoon. I had wished only to assure myself of their good keeping, and of yours. Beatrice, child, come and kiss your uncle." Beatrice did not move. "Be," said the Duke quietly, "if you wish." Beatrice looked very steadily at her uncle. Then, with the dignity of a small ambassador, she crossed the carpet and presented her cheek, and received the kiss, and walked back to her sister's side. She had not, Hannah noted, taken her hand from Thea's once. Hartwell did not ask Thea for a kiss. He said, instead, smoothly, "I shall pray for her recovery, Edmund." He bowed to the Duke. He bowed to Hannah, with a smile that, this time, she met directly. He went out. The drawing-room door closed behind him. Beatrice, still holding Thea's hand, said in the perfectly composed voice of a child who has been afraid for a long time, "I do not want to pray with him." "You shall not be," said the Duke. Beatrice nodded. She took her sister upstairs. Thea did not look back at Hannah from the doorway. Thea looked back at her father, and her father, Hannah saw, had to swallow before he could nod at his younger daughter, and only then did Thea allow herself to be led out. The drawing-room door closed for the second time. Hannah was alone with the Duke in the chimney corner. He did not, this time, walk away. "You knew him," he said. "His ring, Your Grace. I knew his ring." "From where?" She drew a breath. She had not told this story aloud in 6 years. She told it now in fewer than 200 words. "My mother was lost in a Bath lodging house in the autumn I was 17. We'd run out of money for the doctor, and a gentleman at the assembly rooms had heard of her case and called upon her with great kindness. He sat with her 3 afternoons. He held her hand." She paused only long enough to draw a breath. The Duke did not interrupt. "On the 4th afternoon, he persuaded her to sign over to him the lease of the house we still owned in Henley, which was the only thing that stood between me and the parish. He did so by reading her, very slowly, a deed that did not say what he told her it said. I came in at the end. I read the deed. I told her what it said. She tore it from his hand and tore it across, but she had already signed the duplicate, and he had already taken it. He left. She was gone before the next morning." The fire shifted in the grate. She did not look at it. "I had £3 and the lease of nothing. The gentleman wore a signet ring with a falcon stooping at her hair. I have not seen the ring again until last night at the Black Hart. I have not seen the man's face by daylight until this hour. His name was given to my mother as Mr. Roderick. I shall presume that Lord Hartwell's Christian name is Roderick." The Duke was looking at her. He did not, for some seconds, speak. "It is," he said. "Then he is the same man." "He is the same man. And he is now your children's uncle." "He is now my children's uncle." She set her hand on the back of the nearest chair, because she found, very abruptly, that she required it. The Duke saw her do it. He crossed the carpet to her in 2 steps. He did not touch her. He stood near enough that she could feel the heat of him through her wool sleeve, and he stood there for the length of one breath, and another, and did not retreat. "Miss Linwood." "Your Grace?" "I'm going to ask you a thing I have no right to ask." "Ask it." "Stay." She lifted her face. He was very close. She had not, until this moment, stood near enough to him to see that his eyes were not pure grey at all, but had a band of warmer grey-brown around the iris, like firelight on slate. He was looking at her not as a duke looks at a governess, but as a man looks at a witness who has just walked into his own private courtroom, carrying the missing piece of evidence. "I had not intended to leave," she said. "I know. I'm asking again on different grounds. I'm asking you to stay because I cannot fight him on the facts I had this morning, and I can fight him on the facts I have this evening. I'm asking you to stay because my children, both of my children, Miss Linwood, have already chosen you. And I am asking additionally on my own behalf." She did not for a moment breathe. Then she said, with the small flippancy that always rose in her when her chest was full, "On what behalf is that, Your Grace, precisely?" He did not smile. He did not look away. "On the behalf of a man," he said, "who has not in 2 years been near enough to a woman to notice what colour her eyes are by lamplight." "And what colour are they?" "Hazel," he said, "with a brown ring, round the iris. I noticed it 4 days ago over coffee. I have not been able to unnotice it. I shall not press the point. Stay, please." She did not trust her voice to give him a clever answer. She gave him, instead, the only one that mattered. "I shall stay." He inclined his head. He stepped back. He picked up the bell rope and rang for tea. The remaining 10 minutes of that afternoon were spent discussing, in brisk and businesslike tones, The number of pages of Greek Beatrice should attempt before Friday, and neither of them looked at the other directly until Mrs. Pemberton brought the tray. That night, by the light of a single candle in the small writing room, Hannah began the first of a great many letters to Bath. The first was to the daughter of her late mother's solicitor, who would, she believed, still be alive, and would, she believed further, remember. The second was to the old churchwarden of St. Michael's, who had buried her mother and who had, the day before that burial, taken Hannah aside and told her, quietly, without theatre, that he would keep her mother's papers safe in the vestry chest until Hannah, one day, asked for them. The third was to the Assembly Room's steward, who had been the man who had introduced Mr. Roderick to her mother at the pump room. The fourth was to a country attorney in Henley, whose name Hannah had not thought of in 6 years, and who, she now remembered with a small jolt, had refused her mother's signature at the second deed, because the second deed was, in his opinion, fraud. She wrote until the candle burned low. She wrote in her plainest hand. She did not close any letter without a date and a request for reply by return. The Duke had said, after Hartwell had left, "I can fight him on the facts I have this evening." Hannah, looking at the 4 letters spread on her writing table, understood now what facts. Hartwell's case for the wardship rested on his moral standing. The moment his moral standing could be impeached in writing, by deeds, by depositions, by signed letters from a churchwarden and a country solicitor, his case became dust. And his case against the Duke, his cold letter case, became correspondingly the case of a known swindler against a man who had merely been unhappy in his marriage. No magistrate would entertain it. She sealed the letters. She left them at the foot of the door for the morning post. She blew the candle out. The carved horse was on the dressing table. She did not pick it up. In the corridor outside her room, she heard, very faintly, the sound of Mrs. Pemberton on her last round of the night, latching shutters. And, fainter still, the long tread of a man in his own house, pausing at the foot of the staircase as though he were considering whether to come up, and then going on, and then stopping again, and then going to his own door and closing it. She heard the click of his lock. She lay in the dark and counted her own breaths against the candle still warm on the air, and did not sleep until the small hours. The week that followed had the strange, suspended quality of a held breath. Replies began to come in, the churchwarden first, by an extraordinary stroke of the post, on Saturday, the country attorney on Monday, the Assembly Room's steward on Tuesday, the solicitor's daughter, with a packet, on Wednesday. Each letter brought either a document or a sworn willingness to swear to one. By Wednesday evening, Hannah had on her desk the makings of an affidavit that would, taken before a magistrate, identify Lord Roderick Hartwell as the gentleman who, in the autumn 6 years previously, had presented himself to a failing widow in Bath under an assumed name and procured her signature to a fraudulent deed of conveyance. She brought the bundle down to the library on Wednesday after the children were in bed. The Duke was at the desk. He had been writing. He set the pen down and rose when she came in, and she set the bundle on the desk between them as quietly as a woman setting down a sleeping child. "There," she said. He read for 10 minutes without speaking. She sat by the fire. She had not realized, until she sat, how much her shoulders had been carrying. Halfway through the bundle, he made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh, and looked up at her. "You wrote 4 letters in one evening." "5. The 5th was to my old governess, who is now in a position I shall not embarrass her by naming." She added a 6th deposition. "Miss Linwood." "Your Grace." "I have a great many things to say to you, and I am going to say none of them tonight, because if I begin, I shall not stop. And I do not intend to make a declaration to a woman in my employment over the corpse of a fraudulent deed. I shall say, instead, thank you. And I shall say that on Friday, when Hartwell returns, as he will return, you will not be in the drawing-room. You will be upstairs with Beatrice and Thea. I shall meet him alone." "You shall not." He looked up at her sharply. She had not raised her voice. She had only said it.
Miss Linwood, Your Grace. Lord Hartwell has not seen my face since I was 17. He has not connected me. He believes me to be a Bath governess of vague provenance. The moment he sees the affidavit of Mr. Pelham of Henley, he will make the connection. But he will make it in front of a magistrate, not in your drawing room. If you meet him alone on Friday and produce the bundle, he will simply walk out of your house and disappear with the cold letter case still in his pocket.
She drew breath. Her hand on the back of the chair did not tremble. If, however, he meets me in your drawing room on Friday and learns who I am, and learns what I now have, he will spend the rest of the meeting attempting to negotiate with me directly, because he will assume, incorrectly, that I am a sentimental orphan he can frighten or pay off. He has done it once. He will try it again. While he is trying, you shall stand in the next room and listen at the door, and when I ring the bell, you shall come in with the magistrate, and we shall finish this in a single afternoon. I have written to the magistrate this morning. He has accepted. He arrives at 3. There was a long silence. You have done all this, he said, today. I have done all this in 6 years, Your Grace. I only finished it today. He stood up. He came round the desk. He stopped when he was nearer to her chair than he had any business being, and yet not, she was acutely aware, near enough to touch her. He looked down at her. You are an extraordinary woman. I am a woman who has been waiting a long time to be useful. You and your children have given me an occasion. I do not wish to waste it. He sat down on the corner of the desk in a posture that was, by the standards of the house, almost informal. He looked at the fire for a moment. He looked back at her. After Friday, he said, I'm going to ask you something. After Friday, said Hannah, you may. He did not, then, come any nearer. He said only, Good night, Miss Linwood. She rose and curtsied, properly this time, and took the bundle of letters with her, because she meant to read them once more before she slept. In the corridor she paused. Mrs. Pemberton was nowhere in evidence. From the open door of the small parlour she could hear, faintly, the irregular breathing of a child asleep on a sofa where she should not be. She crossed to the door and looked in. Thea was curled on the velvet sofa with a knitted shawl half over her cheek on her arm, her hair loose. She was asleep. Beatrice, Hannah saw with a movement of her heart she had not been ready for, had been sitting on the rug at her sister's feet, and had also gone to sleep, her cheek upon her own folded arm against the sofa cushion. 2 small girls, asleep in the warm room, in the warm house, with their hair coming undone. Hannah stepped in quietly. She lifted the shawl higher over Thea's small shoulders. She bent and gathered Beatrice, heavier now, 8 years old, beginning to be more a girl than a child, up against her shoulder, and then, with care, transferred her so that she lay alongside her sister on the sofa, rather than on the rug. Behind her, very softly, the door creaked. The Duke had followed her. He stood in the doorway. He did not come in. He looked at his children, asleep on the sofa, and at the woman bending over them, and his face did something she had not seen on it before. A small, complete unguarding, as though he had been carrying a held breath for 2 years, and had, in this room, in this hour, finally remembered how to set it down. He came in. He took up the second knitted shawl from the back of the chair and laid it over Beatrice himself. His hand brushed Hannah's where she was tucking it round Thea's foot, and neither of them moved their hand for the length of 1 second. Then he straightened. So did she. They stood together over the sleeping children, a half-pace apart, and he did not say anything, and she did not say anything, and the fire at the far end of the room cracked once and resettled. Mrs. Pemberton will move them up presently, he said, in a voice not much above a whisper. Yes. Miss Linwood? Yes. I shall not sleep tonight. Nor shall I. He smiled at last, a real smile, the first she had seen him give.
It transformed him into a man of 27, rather than a man of 2 centuries. Then we shall both be useless on Friday. Then we shall be useless together. She left the parlour first, because if she had not, she was not sure what she would have permitted herself. She went up the stairs without looking back. She heard him, behind her, banking the parlour fire for the night. Friday was bright and sharp, with frost on the orchard and the smoke of the kitchen chimneys going straight up into a cold blue sky. The magistrate, a Mr. Carstairs of forthright reputation, arrived at 20 minutes to 3 and was placed, with admirable discretion by Mrs. Pemberton, in the small back parlour with a pot of tea, a copy of the affidavit, and the firm understanding that he was not to make himself known until the bell rang twice. Lord Hartwell arrived at 5 minutes past 3 in a hired chaise. He was shown into the drawing-room by Annie. Hannah, alone, was seated by the fire with the affidavit on her lap, in the russet wool gown. He saw her. He stopped just inside the door. "Miss Linwood."
"My lord."
"His Grace is—"
"Indisposed for 10 minutes. He has asked me to receive you. Please sit, my lord. The tea is fresh."
He did not sit. He took, instead, the position by the window he had taken on Wednesday, the position of a man arranging his light. Hannah did not rise.
"I shall come straight to the point," she said pleasantly.
"On Wednesday last, you addressed me as a stranger in the parlour of the Black Hart Inn, and advised me to break my contract with His Grace of Larkmore. You did so, you informed me, as a friend. You also addressed me on Wednesday as Miss Linwood of Bath when I returned through this drawing-room with the children. On both occasions, I did not have the pleasure of recognizing your name. I have it now. I have, since Wednesday, also recovered a number of papers from Bath. I should like, my lord, to read you the relevant passages and to invite your remarks before His Grace returns." He looked at her without expression. His pale grey eyes had gone, she saw, very small.
What papers?
A sworn statement from the Reverend Mr. Bramble, Churchwarden of St. Michael's, Bath, identifying you as the gentleman who attended Mrs. Mary Linwood in her last illness, and procured her signature to a deed of conveyance of the lease of Linwood Cottage, Henley. A second sworn statement from Mr. Pelham, Attorney at Law, Henley, confirming that the conveyance so procured was rejected on his desk as fraudulent, and that the duplicate, which you obtained in Bath, was, when subsequently presented for registration, refused on the grounds of forged witnesses. A third statement from Mr. Wicks, Steward of the Assembly Rooms, Bath, identifying you as the gentleman who introduced himself in the pump room of October that year as Mr. Roderick of Berkshire. There is a fourth. I shall not bother you with the fourth unless you require it. She lifted her eyes from the bundle on her lap and met his. You tried this once, my lord. You tried it on a woman who was already failing, and her 17-year-old daughter. You have come back, in a different coat, to try it again, with a forged moral case made of the letters of a young husband to his unhappy wife. And you have come back into a house in which one of those motherless daughters happens to be the very orphan you took out of Bath 6 years ago. I do not know how I should call this. I am not, my lord, in a vengeful frame of mind. I have lived too long with my mother's death to pretend to enjoy yours. But I am in a frame of mind to end you on paper, this afternoon, in this house, before the day is over. Hartwell did not move. You have nothing, he said. His voice was level. You have a churchwarden in his 80s, and an attorney with a grudge. I have, my lord, a magistrate in the next room. I shall ring for him in a moment. Before I do, I should like to invite you to surrender the letters in your keeping, which you have been employing as an instrument of moral pressure against His Grace of Larkmore. You shall surrender them. You shall withdraw your application for the wardship, and you shall undertake, in writing, this afternoon, before Mr. Carstairs, never to approach the children of your late sister at any time during their minority. You shall do these things, my lord, in exchange for my undertaking that the affidavit on my lap shall not be presented to the King's Bench. If you refuse, it shall be presented on Monday. The choice is yours.
I shall give you 30 seconds. She did not, in fact, look at the clock. She did not need to. She watched, instead, the particular small muscles at the corner of Lord Hartwell's mouth, the muscles she remembered from the lodging house in Bath, the muscles that had moved 6 years ago, when her mother had handed back his ring, with what was almost the last strength in her arm. Those muscles moved now. The pale eyes performed the rapid internal arithmetic of a man who has been outflanked by a piece of paper and a minor witness. He produced, after 20 seconds, from an inner pocket of his coat, a sealed packet. The letters.
Set them on the table, please.
He set them on the table.
And the application?
I shall withdraw it on Monday.
You shall withdraw it now, in writing, in the next room, in front of Mr. Carstairs. Mr. Carstairs has paper. Annie will show you in.
She rang the bell. Twice. Annie opened the drawing-room door, and behind her, with the deliberate gravity of a magistrate who has been listening for 10 minutes, came Mr. Carstairs. Behind Mr. Carstairs, with the deliberate gravity of a man who has waited 2 years to walk into his own drawing-room without a leash on his temper, came the Duke of Larkmore. He did not look at Hartwell. He looked at Hannah. Miss Linwood.
Your Grace.
Are you well?
I am well, Your Grace.
Mr. Carstairs, he said. Lord Hartwell has, I understand, a withdrawal to write. It took 11 minutes. It was done at the writing table by the long window, in the presence of the magistrate, with Hannah at the fire and the Duke standing at the chimney corner, and not, once, taking his eyes from the back of Lord Hartwell's coat. When the withdrawal was signed, witnessed, blotted, and folded into Mr. Carstairs's pocketbook, Hartwell turned. He bowed, very correctly, to the Duke. He turned to Hannah and bowed a second time, and into that bow he put a small, ironic acknowledgement that under any other circumstance she might almost have respected. My condolences, Miss Linwood, he said, on your mother. Belated.
Accepted, my lord. Belated.
He left. He did not, Hannah noted, take his hat from Annie's hands at the door. He was already wearing it. Mr. Carstairs took his tea in the dining room with Mrs. Pemberton, and his leave half an hour later, with the firm and entirely correct opinion that no further action would be required of His Grace beyond the burning of the letters in the drawing-room grate. The letters were burned. Hannah stood at the fire while the Duke fed them in one by one, and she watched the writing on the topmost sheet. I shall not pretend to feel what I do not feel, my dear. Curl and char. And she did not, for some reason, look away. When the letters were ash, the Duke straightened and dusted his hands once against each other. Miss Linwood.
Your Grace.
Will you walk with me in the orchard?
I shall.
They went out without coats. The sun was already low. The orchard, picked clean of all but the few highest apples, had that bare, generous look of a place that had given everything it had this year and was preparing to rest. The grass crackled under their boots. They did not walk arm in arm. They walked side by side, with 1 foot of cold air between them, the way a man and a woman walk when they are trying very hard not to be seen by themselves. They stopped under the largest of the apple trees. He turned to her. Hannah. It was the first time he had used her name. She found that she had stopped walking some moments earlier without noticing.
Edmund,
she said. She had never said it. She said it now. Yes, I know what you are about to say. Say it.
I love you.
Yes.
I have loved you, Hannah, since the second afternoon. I did not have a name for it then. I have a name for it now.
Yes.
I am not asking you to be my children's governess. I am asking you to be my wife. I shall not pretend the question has been considered for the proper length of time. It has not. I shall not pretend that you have known me long enough to answer it. You have not. I'm asking it because the alternative, the pretense of asking it in 3 months as though we had not both already decided it, is, in this house, in our particular case, a kind of dishonesty I do not have the stomach for. Marry me, please." She looked up at him. She put her cold hand into his cold hand. She did not, this time, make a joke. "I shall marry you," she said, "on conditions. Name them. You shall not, ever, treat me as the woman who saved your children. I am the woman who married you. You shall not, ever, treat me as the woman who survived Bath. I am the woman who is here now. You shall be polite to Mrs. Pemberton at all times. You shall, in addition, call me Hannah in front of your daughters. And you shall, in addition, kiss me, here, under this tree, before we go in. Because if you do not, I shall be most unreasonable on the subject for the rest of the afternoon." He laughed. It was a real laugh. Then he kissed her. It was a slow, careful, wholly unembarrassed kiss, and she felt under his coat the steady, unhurried beat of a heart that had not been near a woman in 2 years, and she felt under her own glove the cold of the apple bark as her free hand braced against the trunk, and she felt, distinctly, the carved horse in her pocket pressed between them, and she did not move to remove it. He set his forehead against hers when he straightened. They stood like that, for the length of a breath. "Hannah." "Edmund." "We must go in." "We must." They went in. It was 3 months later, in a soft January that had thawed a fortnight early, that Hannah Linwood, Hannah Ashcombe now, 4 weeks married, very quietly at the parish church, sat by the fire in the small parlour, with Thea on her lap, and a book of pictures open between them. Beatrice was at the table, writing a letter to her godmother in Bath, with the air of a small ambassador composing a treaty. Edmund was at the desk by the window, going through an estate ledger, and looking up every few minutes for no particular reason except to confirm that Hannah was where he had last left her, which she always was. Thea reached up. Thea touched, very deliberately, the small mark on Hannah's throat, where a high collar had pressed all morning. Then Thea said, in a small, perfectly clear voice that had not, until that moment, been heard in any room of Larkmoor House since the previous spring, "Hannah." The room did not move. Beatrice's pen stopped. Edmund's hand, on the page of the ledger, stopped. Hannah, who had been reading aloud the names of the animals in the picture, kept reading for 2 more words because her throat would not, immediately, do anything else. "Hannah," said Thea again, looking up at her with the most serious grey eyes. "Yes, my love." "Hannah, I am here." "Hannah." A small, severe pause. Then, Papa." She did not, that day, say more. She did not need to. Beatrice, very correctly, set her pen down and crossed to the sofa and leaned her brow against Hannah's shoulder for a long moment without saying anything either. Because some things in this house were now established in silence rather than in speech. Edmund stood up from the desk and came and knelt by the sofa and put one large, careful hand on Thea's small knee and one large, careful hand on Hannah's. And he did not speak either, because he had been told several months previously that under this roof the body came first, and naming what the body meant could wait. On the mantelpiece, between 2 beeswax candles, stood a small, pale beechwood horse. It had been there since November. Its mane was suggested rather than carved. Its legs were sturdy and intentionally too short. A child's thumb, usually Thea's, occasionally Beatrice's, sometimes, on certain nights, Hannah's, had recently taken to polishing the withers smooth. The polish was already considerable. By spring, it would be considerable enough that one would have to stop and remember to be glad of it. Outside, beyond the long window, a slow January rain had begun against the glass. It was the polite, persistent kind that did not drench but glazed every leaf, and made the gravel ring under the boots of anyone who chose to walk in it. No one, this afternoon, chose.
They sat together by the fire. A man, a woman, 2 girls, a small wooden horse, and Hannah, who had been warned by a stranger in a public room that this house ate kinder women than herself, found that she had been invited by a small grave child with hazel bread on her chin and a single careful word in her mouth, to be the kindest woman she had ever been. She had not turned the carriage around. If you are listening to this somewhere far from any house at all, and a stranger has lately been kind enough to warn you off something you had already decided to walk toward, I hope you will not turn the carriage around either. Tell me, in the comments, whose hand it was that you held on first. And if the story warmed you, stay with us, and the next one shall be ready by the next fire.